This is such an important topic. When I'm a young guy, as you can tell, but I have read some history about what it was like when we first started building the electric grid over a century ago now. I don't think we could have imagined the technologies that we would use to power our homes and businesses and hospitals and everything today. And I think the challenge is different. You know, back then the real challenge was just extending power itself throughout every corner of our society. And there was a challenge, which was that those providing power knew they could make money in the cities, in well-populated areas, in places with a lot of business and commercial opportunities. But it was not as profitable to take electric power out into the countryside, into the hill country of Texas, for example. And so the government made a basic deal, which was that they would provide essentially a monopoly over providing power in a lot of these areas. Firms would make quite a bit of money, utilities would, and in exchange, they would carry their product everywhere that it needed to be. And I think in the 21st century, we have a similar dilemma on our hands, but there's a similar deal to be made, which is today the challenge is not just to provide power itself everywhere, but to provide power in a way that is clean and efficient and allows us to stay economically competitive even as we become a society much less dependent on carbon. And although electricity demand has been flat, we should see electricity demand increase as we electrify more segments of our society in order to accomplish those goals. But to get there, it's clear that we have to change the energy sector. We know that as we do that, for example, there are going to be much more serious threats to our electric grid from cyber attacks and otherwise. We know that the economics of this whole thing are changing as natural gas resources have come online. That's good for constituents like mine who are saving money. But as all this stuff changes, we're going to have to invest to really upgrade the system that is meant to integrate all these new sources of energy and to strike a balance between them in real time, which has become one of the big challenges with battery storage especially. That's a computing challenge, it's a technological challenge, it's a challenge when it comes to making the basic infrastructure investment, and that's what we're here to talk about today. I was definitely alarmed to hear, as I'm sure many of you were, about the first serious cyber attack on our nation's electric grid back in March, or at least it was reported in March. As far as we know, no customers lost power in that attack, but it obviously is a warning sign of the incredibly serious damage that could happen if we don't take action on this issue. And by the time one happens when somebody does lose power, it'll be much too late. And so the choice facing all of us today is whether we can get the legislative machinery to work in such a way that we can really make a serious investment and try to protect folks from the cyber attacks that we all know are going to come. We know that Russia and China and other adversaries are actively probing our defenses, and they would love to have in their back pocket the ability to shut down parts of our grid when it's convenient for them. And the decision facing us is whether we will allow that to happen. And I think I speak for every member of this committee when I say that we will not. That's why I'm looking forward to talking about these subjects today. We have the draft Grid Modernization Research and Development Act of 2019, which will allow us to set forth a wide array of research opportunities on topics like grid modernization, resilience, emergency response, modeling, which we know is going to be so important to be able to manage the new type of grid that we have, and better integration of buildings, vehicles, and renewable sources. Several members of this committee, including Mr. Caston and Mr. Foster, have already introduced legislation on these subjects, and we are happy to incorporate elements of those into these drafts, and we'll continue working on making sure we do that. We're also looking at the Grid Cybersecurity Research and Development Act of 2019, which updates a bill previously introduced by Mr. Barra. This would authorize a cross-agency research and development program to do exactly what I've discussed, which is harden and mitigate the electric grid from cyber attacks. It would be carried out in partnership with the Department of Homeland Security, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, and the National Science Foundation. Would involve technical assistance, education, and workforce. One of the aspects of cybersecurity that I think is often underappreciated is the fact that it is also a workforce issue. We don't have enough people trained and working in cybersecurity today as we need, and there will be tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands more openings in the next few years, many of which in my home area of Pittsburgh because of the great work done at Carnegie Mellon, but also the University of Pittsburgh's Cyber Law Institute, among others, really training people up for this. And so That's what these kind of programs are going to authorize. We're excited to talk about them. And with that, I will now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Weber, for an opening statement.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Lamb, for hosting this hearing. I was asking what the population of Pittsburgh is. The metro area is about 1.5 million. Is that about right? So that's a lot of electricity. But we appreciate you hosting this hearing. This afternoon, we will hear from expert witnesses on the existing strengths and weaknesses of our nation's electric grid and the impact that potential attacks and incidents could have on our grid reliability and national security. Our witnesses today will also discuss advances in the research and development of new grid tools and technologies and hopefully provide insight, I know you will, into how the federal government can work alongside of American industries to strengthen our energy sector. The reliability of America's power grid is one of our greatest economic strengths. I like to say that the things that make America great are the things that America makes. How do we do that? We have a strong, reliable energy supply. That's how we do it. In my home state of Texas, reliable and affordable power serves a population that is increasing by more than 1,000 a day. Chairman Lamb, that's why I was asking you. We literally get 30,000 people a month into Texas. Now multiply times 12 and you figure out real quick what that does in a year. 1,000 people per day. And it supports the energy-intensive industries that drive the United States consumption of energy. Texas is by far the nation's largest producer and consumer of electricity, and keeping its power grid reliable and secure is absolutely key to maintaining U.S. economic growth. But even in Texas, it is common knowledge that our electric grid faces significant and diverse threats to the reliability and the resiliency of power delivery. Put simply, we cannot predict when a cyber attack would threaten our power supply that you referenced, Mr. Chairman, and we do not know when the next natural disaster might occur. In 2017, we were reminded of this fact by the impact of Hurricane Harvey, a devastating Category 4 hurricane that hit the Texas Gulf Coast and caused significant generator and transmission line outages for many on the Texas Gulf Coast and the Texas Interconnection. However, due to proper planning and management by what we call ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, the Texas grid was able to recover quickly from this devastating storm. Since it's not a question of if, but a question of when that same power grid will face significant physical and cyber threats, the modernization of the national electricity system must be our priority. According to the Department of Energy, DOE, the U.S. electric grid must be updated within the next decade to address challenges including aging U.S. energy infrastructure, changes in demand for energy, emerging threats, and fundamental shifts in the U.S. energy supply portfolio as energy sources, rightfully so, like renewables and nuclear, increase. Again, we can see these changes taking place in my very own home state, where today nuclear generation is our most reliable source of energy, in fact, running at more than 93% of the time over the last 3 years. And where we lead, we also lead the nation in wind energy, and we're number 5 in solar energy, by the way. As next-generation energy technologies continue to come online, and as cyber security capabilities continue to grow and evolve, we must take our action to counter our grid vulnerabilities and provide necessary updates to this very critical and necessary infrastructure. Thankfully, DOE funds broad research and development programs to support grid modernization and security technologies through department-wide collaborations like the Grid Modernization Initiative, or GMI, and the Grid Modernization Lab Consortium, GMLC. DOE also funds robust research in novel grid technologies and computational modeling efforts through its Office of Electricity, OE, and cybersecurity technology for energy delivery systems through its Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response, CSER. We are grateful to have two witnesses representing these important efforts here this afternoon, the Honorable Karen Evans, Assistant Secretary of CSER, and Mr. Juan Torres, an Associate Laboratory Director at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and Co-Chair of Grid Modernization Lab Consortium. Welcome to both of you. Welcome to all of you. Modernizing our grid will require these important programs, along with cooperation from many federal agencies, states, and industry. I hope our witnesses, I trust our witnesses, can share their expertise and provide valuable insight on how Congress can best support these very collaborative efforts. I want to thank the chairman again for holding this hearing. I look forward to a very productive and, dare I say, electrifying discussion. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Don't dare.
It wouldn't be the first time that electricity was powered by a lot of hot air from Texas.
Or the last.
Had to include that for the ranking member's granddaughter in the audience today. We welcome her. And I do think it is important to note the bipartisan nature of this discussion, as it often is on this committee on these subjects. Mr. Weber and I both are big supporters of nuclear energy and a sort of all of the above type strategy. So it's one thing that doesn't always break through the headlines, but is a beacon of hope here in Washington some days. So at this time, I would like to introduce our witnesses. The Honorable Karen Evans is Assistant Secretary of the Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response, CSER, at the U.S. Department of Energy. Before leading CSER, Ms. Evans was the National Director of the U.S. Cyber Challenge, a public-private program designed to help address the skills gap in the cybersecurity field. She also worked for the George W. Bush administration, where she was an IT official at the Office of Management and Budget and served as the Department of Energy's Chief Information Officer. Mr. Juan Torres is the Associate Laboratory Director for Energy Systems Integration at NREL and the co-chair of the Grid Modernization Laboratory Consortium, which is a partnership of 14 national labs to advance modernization of the U.S. power grid. Prior to joining NREL, Mr. Torres held a variety of positions over the course of a 27-year-long career at Sandia National Lab, where he worked on securing our energy infrastructure, among other topics. Ms. Kelly Speakes-Backman is the CEO of the Energy Storage Association. Kelly has spent over 20 years working in energy and environmental issues in the public, NGO, and private sectors, including United Technologies, SunEdison, and Alliance to Save Energy. She is a former commissioner of the Maryland Public Service Commission, where she also served as chair of the board of directors of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, co-vice chair of the NARUC Committee on Energy Resources and the Environment, and a member of the EPRI Energy Efficiency and Grid Modernization Public Advisory Group. And Ms. Katherine Hamilton is the chair of 38 North Solutions, a public policy consultancy specializing in clean energy and innovation, and the executive director of the Advanced Energy Management Alliance. She previously ran the GridWise Alliance, was policy director to the Energy Storage Association, and worked at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Katherine worked in buildings research and government relations. She also spent a decade at an investor-owned utility designing electrical systems for commercial and residential developments. As our witnesses should know, you will each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record. When you have completed your spoken testimony, we will begin with questions, and each member will then have 5 minutes for questions. We will start with the testimony of Ms. Evans.
Chairman Lamb, Ranking Member Weber, and members of the subcommittee, it is an honor and a privilege to serve at the Department of Energy as the Assistant Secretary for the Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the department. One of the most critical missions at DOE is developing the science and technology to successfully counter the ever-evolving, increasing threat of cyber and other attacks on our networks, data, facilities, and infrastructure. DOE works closely with our federal agencies, state and local, tribal, and territorial governments, industry, and our national laboratory partners to accomplish this mission. Another critical mission for DOE is ensuring the resilience of our electric grid and successfully countering the ever-evolving, increasing threat of physical and cyber attacks. DOE recently announced an $8 million investment in innovations that will enhance the reliability and the resiliency of our nation's energy infrastructure. This R&D partnership opportunity will spur the development of the next generation of tools and technologies that will become widely adopted throughout the energy sector. As we protect our infrastructure from cyber threats, we are also working to improve and complete the resilience of our electricity systems. Our Office of Electricity also supports transmission system resilience and generation diversity and is exploring new architecture approaches for the electric grid. This includes the development of the North American Energy Resilience Model that aims to provide unique and groundbreaking national-scale energy planning and real-time situational awareness capabilities to enhance security and resilience. A large component of DOE's work is pursuing cutting-edge innovation in big data, artificial intelligence, and grid-scale energy storage based on new technology. Grid-scale storage will be an important enabler for renewable integration and for clean base load power. While today's technologies are already providing value to the grid, there are physical limitations to the traditional batteries and pumped hydro that will be surpassed by the next generation technologies. Efforts in grid-scale energy storage are already producing important advancements. Grid-scale energy storage technologies have been demonstrated using new generation of advanced flow batteries, which rely on lower-cost electrolytes. We are also continuing to advance energy storage through our Advanced Energy Storage Initiative, which includes the development of the new grid storage launchpad, aimed at accelerating materials development, testing, and independent evaluation of battery technologies for grid applications. In addition to the R&D at the DOE National Laboratories support the development of technologies that strengthen and improve energy infrastructure so that consumers have access to reliable and secure sources of energy. Another program driving enabling technologies is DOE's Grid Modernization Initiative, GMI, which focuses on the integration of increasing the amount of variable generation into the grid through R&D investments at our national labs. One noteworthy GMI effort will accelerate the conversion of the National Wind Technology Center campus into an experimental microgrid capable of testing grid integration at megawatt scale. These are just a few of the examples of how the United States is approaching its commitment to updating and improving its energy infrastructure and environmental responsibility within its own border. But these same issues are also at the heart of so many of our partnerships and work abroad. Reliant and resilient energy infrastructure is critical to the U.S. economy's competitiveness, innovation, and leadership. Our long-term approach will strengthen our national security and positively impact our economy. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before this subcommittee, and I'm happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Mr. Torres.
Thank you. Chairman Lamb, Ranking Member Weber, members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to discuss the critical challenge of grid modernization and cybersecurity and the crucial research needed to create a flexible, more secure, and more resilient U.S. power system. I'm Hon Torres. I serve as the Associate Laboratory Director for Energy Systems Integration at the Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or NREL, in Golden, Colorado. I've been affiliated with federal research in our national laboratory system for more than 29 years. In my current position, I direct NREL's efforts to strengthen the security, resilience, and sustainability of our nation's electric grid. In addition, I'm co-chair of the DOE Grid Modernization Laboratory Consortium, or GMLC, and team lead for the GMLC Security and Resilience Research. I commend the committee for this timely discussion, given that every aspect of our economy, our national security, and critical infrastructure in the U.S. is deeply dependent on the reliable operation of our electrical system. I'm often asked, when will we be finished with modernizing the grid? The answer is that grid modernization is a journey. It's not a single destination. As long as we need electricity to remain economically competitive, to defend our nation against evolving threats, and to maintain our way of life, we'll need to continually advance our electric infrastructure. Fundamentally, the research we're conducting must assure that our future grid has greater resilience to hazards of all types, improved reliability for everyday operations, enhanced security from increasing and evolving threats, continued affordability to maintain our economic prosperity, superior flexibility to respond to the variability and uncertainty of conditions at different timescales, including a range of energy futures. We've come a long way in a few short years of investment through the DOE's Grid Modernization Initiative, but there remains much work to do. Research within the GMLC has the opportunity to strengthen the trajectory of our grid's development. This work will in turn inform the investment decisions we make today so we can increase the impact of the new technologies that will serve the grid for decades to come. The steps we take now can move us toward enabling the grid of the future to address pressing challenges such as a changing mix of generation types, the need for cost-effective energy storage, extreme weather events, increasing cyber and physical threats, electrification of our transportation system, and growing use of digital and communication technologies. I'd like to highlight just a few examples of the important work that is ongoing around the National Lab system through DOE support. The National Lab's deep modeling capability is providing the basis for the DOE Office of Electricity's North American Energy Resilience Model that will in the future help us understand the state of resilience for the power grid and natural gas infrastructure. With DOE's Solar Technologies Office, we are developing a roadmap that will guide cybersecurity to confront the unique needs of the growing solar energy sector and other distributed energy systems. And as I speak with you, NREL, in partnership with the DOE Wind Energy Technologies Office and the International Electrotechnical Commission, today is hosting a cybersecurity workshop at the National Wind Technology Center at NREL's Flatiron campus. This event is bringing key government and industry players together for the first time to address the cybersecurity needs of the growing wind power industry. Finally, I applaud the subcommittee for the commitment and insight you have shown in holding this hearing and with pending legislation that addresses the critical challenges of our future electric grid. The benefits of technical solutions cannot be fully realized without the appropriate business models, regulatory structure, and policies to support and enable them. Given the importance of these very issues to DOE, to the national laboratories, and of course to Congress, I'd like to invite you to attend the National Lab Day on Capitol Hill next week, July 24th, in the Rayburn House Office Building. The event will be focused exclusively on grid modernization and cybersecurity, and many grid researchers, other experts from the labs, as well as myself, will be on hand for discussion at a series of exhibits that will highlight much of the work I'm discussing today. Thank you for the privilege to address this committee, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Speakes-Backman.
Chairman Lamb, Ranking Member Weber, and members of the subcommittee, on behalf of ESA, thank you for the invitation to speak today on the role that energy storage plays in modernizing and securing our electric power infrastructure. Energy storage technologies are transforming the way we generate, deliver, and use electricity because it essentially decouples the element of time from when we make it, move it, and sell it. That simple concept enables enormous amounts of capabilities for the grid, supplying backup power, reducing peak system demands, relieving stressed infrastructure, firming variable generation sources like solar and wind, and optimizing inflexible generation sources like nuclear. Most people think of a battery when they hear energy storage, but there are a variety of technologies, not only different kinds of batteries like flow batteries, but also mechanical storage technologies like pumped hydro and flywheels, thermal storage technologies like ice storage and molten salt, and power-to-gas storage technologies like hydrogen and ammonia. Each has its own performance characteristics and best-suited applications, but all do the same job of storing energy for use when and where it's needed most. Storage is uniquely flexible from among all resources. It's the only grid resource that operates as both supply and demand in a single asset. I've outlined a lot of reasons in my written testimony, of course, for our claim, quoting my fellow panelist, Katherine Hamilton, that storage is the bacon of the grid. It just makes everything a little bit better. ESA applauds the subcommittee for incorporating energy storage into its Grid Modernization Research and Development Act of 2019 to modernize this and secure the electric grid. For the remainder of my testimony today, I'm going to outline the recommendations from my written testimony, which are intended to strengthen the effect of the proposed legislation. So in Section 3, Enhancing Grid Resilience and Emergency Response, the proposal to enhance grid resilience is really important, particularly in light of the terrible impact of the increasingly frequent and severe weather events limiting access to electricity. Grants for projects that increase the resilience of electric service with distributed energy resources will speed the ability of communities and local governments to prepare for the next disaster. It's also important for the federal government to use that information that it gathers in this effort to prove the economic case for resilience investment more broadly so that state commissions can measure cost effectiveness and the private sector can step in when the proposed grant money is spent. To that end, ESA asks the subcommittee to consider directing DOE to work with stakeholders to develop a method for quantifying the economic value of resilience. In Section 6, there are a number of commendable provisions within Section 6, grid-scale energy storage, reflecting bipartisan ideas from H.R. 2909, the Promoting Grid Storage Act, and H.R. 2986, the Better Energy Storage Technology Act, or BEST Act. ESA endorses both these bills. The Promoting Grid Storage Act would create a competitive grant program at the Department of Energy for state and local governments, utilities, public power authorities, and rural co-ops seeking support for incorporating storage into long-term planning and grid operations. We respectfully request that the subcommittee include the competitive grant program from Sections 4 and 6 of the Promoting Grid Storage Act to accelerate learning through experience and share that investment responsibility. The BEST Act emphasizes DOE investments in demonstrations projects to provide flexibility on intraday, interday, and seasonal basis. Those demonstrations are intended to establish cost and performance targets, which is critical to developing commercialization milestones, but also may pose a risk to innovation, unintentionally limiting technology development pathways. Section 7, in the hybrid energy systems, we commend the subcommittee for efforts to drive research and development on storage systems paired with generation. Hybrid systems with storage are relatively new, and we ask in this section that the subcommittee direct FERC to seek a report on the current rules on interconnection, market participation, and capacity accreditation of hybrid energy systems. And finally, in Section 8, grid integration, in addition to the RD&D programs for integrating an electrified transportation system, we recommend adding complementary RD&D efforts on the reuse of EV batteries for second life applications in charging infrastructure and electric grid service. Reuse for grid applications could lower costs and could divert still useful assets from recycling or disposal. And so with that, I thank you for the opportunity to speak to these critical issues, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you. And Ms. Hamilton.
Good afternoon. My name is Katherine Hamilton. I'm the chair of the firm 38 North Solutions and executive director of Advanced Energy Management Alliance, a coalition of distributed energy resource providers and consumers. Thank you to Chairman Lamb, Ranking Member Weber, and the entire subcommittee for inviting me to testify before you today. A lot has changed in the last 2 decades since I last appeared before this committee. Renewable energy resources are now the cheapest source of electricity, and energy storage is able to cost-effectively replace old fossil fuel peaker plants. Innovation has been instrumental in allowing these resources to efficiently, effectively, and safely integrate into the electric grid. And while innovation continues in the private sector, federal investment and leadership is crucial to solving many of our most complex puzzles around grid modernization. This act would provide a great deal of that leadership. It is appropriate that the first part of the bill focuses on resilience. The need for resilience continues to grow given increasing storms, wildfires, and other climate-related incidents. Reliability is the percentage of availability over time, while resilience is the ability to recover quickly from a specific situation. Distributed resources such as microgrids that can recover quickly from an outage incident and provide continued service to local communities will be important to increasing their resilience. In addition to metrics on outage duration, data should be collected on recovery time, costs of downtime, and customer impact. I suggest that a section on risk be developed, mapping out areas at greatest risk from both a physical as well as an economic standpoint. Smart grid technology deployments have allowed the grid to operate more efficiently and with greater visibility. The year of detective work necessary to determine that the Northeast blackout of 2003 was caused by a branch in Cleveland would no longer be the case thanks to these technologies. The focus on modeling is greatly needed. Modeling assumptions can determine long-term investment in generation resources that may or may not be necessary and that are paid for through consumer rate increases. While planning models have improved, most are lacking in considering demand-side resources in the planning process. So customer-sided resources from demand response to solar, energy efficiency, combined heat and power, electric vehicles, all can contribute to the customer not just being a load on the system, but actually becoming part of the resource, allowing the supply and demand sides to become interchangeable. Technology demonstrations are key to proof of concept, lowering risk and gathering data for innovative solutions. A concept that's been used in other sectors and to some degree in the utility sector is a sandbox, where an area is set aside that is completely free of regulation and where multiple systems, technologies, and approaches can be experimented with, removed from penalty and risk to the utility. Additional experimentation can actually lead to more creative solutions. Advanced energy storage has grown tremendously and seen exponentially reduced costs. New technologies have been nurtured and funded at the Department of Energy, including in RPE, and continued R&D should test new chemistries and use cases. But instead of identifying this research as grid scale or prescribing time durations for storage technology operations, I recommend stating the problems that should be solved or the services delivered and allow new chemistries and technologies to be developed that fit those needs. Grid integration is key to understanding how all these systems can interact to multiply the benefits of these innovative technologies for the grid and consumers. In addition to protecting sensitive grid information and utility security, any standards for consumer or third-party access to consumer data should be reasonable while ensuring privacy of information. I would caution against being overly prescriptive and inadvertently stifling innovation, including the very innovation that could mitigate security risk. While these programs are not necessarily designed to reduce carbon emissions, tracking greenhouse gas impact is still useful as we transition to a cleaner energy future and explore technologies whose greenhouse gas impacts are still relatively unknown. Finally, I would propose adding a new section to the bill, one focused more on social science. Given the speed of our energy transition, manufacturing and worker transition is lagging. The U.S. should not only be the leading source of entrepreneurship globally, but we should also lead the world in building and deploying new energy technologies. I suggest that research be conducted on how factories can be retooled, power plants repurposed with clean fuels, and workers trained to adjust to new technologies. The U.S. is the global leader on clean and smart energy technology innovation, but to continue on that trajectory, we must sustain our R&D programs in ways that can assist grid operators, utilities, entrepreneurs, our workforce, communities, and consumers. Thank you again to the subcommittee for allowing me to testify and for showing leadership in grid modernization, research, and development.
Okay, at this point, we will begin our first round of questions. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Hamilton, I'd actually like to start where you left off, which is on the need to make sure that we're thinking ahead on the impact of jobs that this transition will have. It will have it whether we like it or not. So as far as I'm concerned, the question is, what are we going to do about it? The whole theme of today's hearing is how are we going to protect? How are we going to protect the grid, make sure that people's power is protected, that their data is protected, but we also have to make sure that their jobs are protected. And I believe we can do that. There's going to be a lot of hands-on physical work that needs to be done to adjust our infrastructure, to install new equipment. But I was just hoping you could say a little bit more about what that would look like as a research project. What are some ideas of the type of research we would have to authorize, who would be doing it, what do we need to know, and when? If you could, anything more you can say on that, please.
It's a great question, Mr. Chairman, and it's something I think about a lot because since I was in the utility, the workforce has been aging. Now about 30% of the utility workforce consists of millennials, about 40% of the engineers. And millennials tend to change jobs faster than we used to in the utility workforce. You would start in the utility and you would retire in the utility. But people change jobs a lot faster. And there are more types of jobs, so that we need to find out what trainings are needed. I think it's important for a research project to look at what are all the skills that we need and where do we need to source those and who can do that? What are some of the skills that transfer really easily? For example, a coal worker that is an engineer or a certified electrician might transfer really well into energy storage or solar, where an electrician might be needed. So I think there is some of that to be done. There also, in California right now, there are wildfires that are going to potentially cause public safety outages of 30 days or more. I mean, substantial outages. And there are not enough trained tree trimmers to do the work needed on vegetation management. These are not, you can't send a kid out with a bushwhacker. This is really trained labor. And so there are a lot of job needs and opportunities, and there are people who don't have jobs, and we need to somehow match those. So bringing the public sector and the private sector together on that seems to me to be a good way to think about that.
I think that's correct. Anybody else from the panel want to jump in on that topic? Are you familiar with researchers or people doing this kind of work who might be able to add to that? Okay, we'll be sure to look at it on our own. Thank you for raising it. Ms. Evans, on a kind of similar theme, I noted at the beginning that I think we're short on the cybersecurity workforce and the jobs that need to be done there. Can you talk a little bit about how our bill or future efforts we might make can help us incentivize people to not only go into the areas of cybersecurity, but really to serve the public the way that you have and help us protect these assets?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a lot of work that's already going on in this area that I know you are aware of under the National Institute of Standards and with the Department of Homeland Security, and then with the executive order that just recently was released. So this, under the categories of cyber, it's always going to increase. It's never going to go away. And also, as my esteemed colleague just described the utility workforce, you're going to have to constantly look at what skill sets you're going to need. Right now, we're very focused on what I would call the first responders and those types of skills that you want to have if you think about it that way. But you also have to build out who are the specialists that are having, if you think about it on a 1 to 10, that is going to have to constantly be looked at, is what is the right mix, both for the government as well as for private industry.
Thank you very much. And I think with both, and you know this from hosting the Cybersecurity Challenge or promoting it, I think with both sets of challenges, we need to be willing to look deep into our educational pipeline and realize that starting younger people on these projects and gaining those skills at an earlier age is going to be essential for us to ever get ahead of this. It's a lot harder to retrain someone at an older age, give them the confidence that they need to make that transition than if we have people interested in it from the beginning. So with that, I will recognize Mr. Weber for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Assistant Secretary Evans, one of the things that makes Texas unique is our islanded grid, ERCOT, that I referred to, managed by it's the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. I know you're aware of that. And it's my understanding that this allows Texas to respond more quickly to cyber and physical cyber attacks, physical threats, physical events, since they actually operate under one set of regulations, state of Texas, and of course they're accountable not to FERC, but to the agency in Texas. In your opinion, are Texas utilities more or less vulnerable because they have that kind of operating system?
I don't know that I want to actually say they're more or less vulnerable. I think that the way that Texas has approached this problem is that they're aware. And as was mentioned in some of my colleagues' testimonies where we were talking about shifting more toward risk, that they have the ability to constantly evaluate the risk regardless of whether it's a physical risk or cyber risk or a weather risk. And so it depends on how the mix works, but because of the way they're organized, they can always constantly evaluate the risk.
Right, and you're aware of that they're accountable to the PUC of Texas Public Utilities Commission as opposed to FERC, and so the state as a whole gets to kind of have control of that grid, 1 out of 9 or 8 in the country, and there was kind of a little undetermined area there. So I think it helps them work actually quicker and faster. And I do want to come back to you, too. In your prepared testimony, you said that existing CSER projects in artificial intelligence, AI, and quantum technology also. So how is CSER using AI to strengthen the electric grid against cyber threats? And I want to give a part B to that question. The chairman talked about training people, and we talked about young people going into these different jobs and changing jobs more often. Is CSER and the department finding that they can find young people, retain young people, and train people in AI and hopefully quantum computing?
So I'll take the second part of that question first. What we are doing as a department as a whole is we do have an education piece associated with what is happening in CSER. We have a competition, which is the Cyber Force competition, that reaches out to all the universities. Several of the labs, 7 of the labs participate. So that's our outreach, and we are attempting to also work with the labs as well as us to then hire directly from the winners. We have a challenge, just like the rest of the government, just like the sector as a whole in this area. So we are working on creative ways through our authorities to be able to do that. On the other part of the question as to looking at how we are using artificial intelligence and quantum computing, we have several research and development efforts that are underway, but it is really to try to get it machine to machine so that you're elevating the skill level. So things that the machines can do based on how we know attack vectors will happen is to build that into the technology and into the solutions. And then have those learning capabilities then go across our data stores as it relates. So that's the artificial intelligence piece, so that then we can then feed into the intelligence sector. In visiting the labs, I can tell you that the folks that I visit there that are studying under the labs, they are very interested in how we're going about doing this, so I'm hoping that I can hire them, or they hire them.
Oh, okay, well, I appreciate that. Mr. Torres, I want to follow up with you on that. What are you experiencing in that same vein of thought?
Okay, with regards to both questions, I'll start with the artificial intelligence and some of the advanced technology concepts. So what we're seeing is the grid is evolving to the point that humans just won't be able to respond quickly enough to all the information that's going to be available to them. So they're going to have to be aided through some sort of computing, artificial intelligence types of technologies. So we are looking into concepts like autonomous systems, where we can incorporate some of the intelligence there to make decisions to maintain reliability, but also we need to do this in a way where we incorporate security from the very beginning, where we assume these systems are going to be targeted. So we are doing research in that particular space. With regards to the talent pipeline, on the research side, what we are seeing is the pipeline just is not going to be strong enough here long term. We're not seeing enough people continuing into graduate research, their graduate studies. So we see a shortfall in folks with backgrounds in computer science, computer engineering, in electrical engineering, in the power grid. I think I heard earlier from Ms. Hamilton the fact that most of the workforce in the utility sector, they used to work their entire careers. They don't do that anymore. How can we retain folks into those areas, but also how can we retain the researchers so that we as a country can maintain leadership in these technologies that are going to shape the future grid?
All right, I appreciate that. I'm over my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Recognize Mr. Lipinski for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing. Thank our witnesses for their testimony. I wanted to follow up on one of the things that we were just talking about here, is artificial intelligence. I have introduced the Growing Artificial Intelligence Through Research, or a Greater Act, which would provide necessary resources to advance the science of AI and multiple applications. And I know Mr. Torres was just speaking about this, Secretary Evans was just speaking about this. I wanted to ask Mr. Torres, What are some of the research directions that need to be addressed to pursue an autonomous grid? And do you think that the Department of Energy has the resources necessary to pursue the research right now?
I don't think I've done a full assessment to be able to answer that full question, but I can tell you about some of the things where I think the Department of Energy can have some impact. There are some foundational aspects to artificial intelligence application to the grid that we really need to develop further. We have some work going on right now where we're applying AI concepts to the grid, as I mentioned, focused around building out 4 foundational areas that we think are really important. One is complex systems and understanding complex systems theory, and the second is big data analytics. The third is nonlinear control. So what we're seeing is with highly distributed systems, some of the linear control concepts that are used now on the grid may not apply in a highly decentralized type of system. And then the fourth area is optimization. How do you really get all of these really complex, highly distributed, where intelligence may be distributed, to work together to achieve some sort of common goal so that it works as a cohesive system. So there's opportunity to continue to advance some of the foundations to be able to apply AI for the grid specifically.
Secretary Evans, do you have anything you wanted to add there?
Well, what I would like to offer you, sir, is that the Secretary is very committed to the AI, and Undersecretary DeBar, I know, has really been working on this. So I would like to take it back and get back to you specifically about what our AI functions are doing. I know what we're doing in our areas that relates to cyber, but the department is vast, as you know. So I'd be happy to get it back to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, in addition to AI, everyone, I think, on this committee hopefully knows by now that my interest in always promoting social science research and the importance of social science research, which sometimes gets short shrift, and with the great importance that it has to fit in with a lot of our other research. So very happy that Ms. Hamilton raised that. Is there anything else you wanted to add about what we need to do in integrating social science research into this area that we're talking about?
Thank you for the comment. One thing I would just note is that because I come from working with entrepreneurial companies, and innovation has become much more democratized. So innovators are not limited to our labs, our universities, or our utilities. They are everywhere. They're kids in basements playing with their apps, right? So trying to make sure that our research programs are able to connect the dots so that we can bring entrepreneurs to test and make sure that we have proof of concept, because no utility is going to purchase a piece of equipment that was designed in somebody's basement. They need to know that Department of Energy and the national labs have given it the seal of approval and have shown credibility by testing it and making sure that this all works. So I feel like, while part of that is about bringing new people into the industry, because there are so many new excited young people coming in, we also need to make sure that we then connect them to the programs that are existing, to enrich the programs too.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. I won't, for sake of time, I don't have much. I will yield back.
Recognize Mr. Cloud.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for being here. Assistant Secretary Evans, I wanted to touch on EMPs. The Commission to Assess the Threat from Electromagnetic Pulse Attack has warned that a high-altitude EMP would be they quote, an existential threat to the survival of the United States and its allies. That sounds pretty ominous. In your written testimony, you mentioned that Caesar's working to address EMP risks by sharing knowledge with industry and developing mitigation strategies. Could you explain to us a little bit of what you're doing to communicate with stakeholders, how the progress is going, what our readiness is at this point?
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about that. The administration did pass and send out an executive order dealing specifically with EMPs, and so we're leveraging the research that's already there. There's a group that we work with within the national labs called CSMART, so I'm going to give you the acronym. It's Center for EMP GMD Simulation, Modeling, Analysis, Research, and Testing. And what, yes, and it involves several of our labs. This is because of that research that was previously done. And so Sandia is at the center, and then we have Savannah River, Livermore is involved, Los Alamos, and Oak Ridge. And then we work with EPRI on this, and a lot of this is how do we model it? How do we do the validations of some of the things that were in that study so that we can actually work with industry through our ESCC work and our oil and natural gas subsector coordinating group and share that research back out with them? Because there's a debate of whether you need to harden it all the way up to military standards or whether you can take a phased approach and what's the impact of that based on the wavelengths. And so that research is ongoing. The test beds are being developed. So to the point about being able to validate the technology and validate the research, that's what we're doing. We intend to accelerate that, provided what happens in our fiscal year 2020 budget. And so I know the House passed it, so you guys included the ability for us to do that research. So we're looking forward to continuing that work.
Are you working or communicating with like local entities, local governments, power providers, or is it more still in the research phase?
The information that we have to date and how we work with EPRI and then how we work with state and local governments and then through our industry partnerships and then with the councils, we do convey that out. We also work with the National Governors Association. We have many outreach. We work through the associations as well, so the information and the research to date is shared. And then they also know what our project plan is going forward and then who we are working with in the national labs as well.
Are you getting any feedback on what challenges are on the ground, or?
The hardest part is like to what level, and I would like Mr. Torres to jump in here if he feels so inclined,
Yep.
is what exactly how the investment's going to go forward and how you would harden the different pieces of this. And then a lot of the utilities, we have some things that are going on with some of the bigger utilities, and they are sharing that information so that those decisions can be made. And we also work with FERC on this as well. And then FERC also then reaches out and shares the information too, because this becomes an investment decision, and then it'll inform the standards decisions going forward with FERC.
Okay. Any of you want to speak to it as well?
So I totally agree with everything Assistant Secretary Evans said there. There is an element of the energy that's released during an EMP that's very similar to GMD, geomagnetic disturbance event. So that's something that we need to take into account as well, that actually is probably more likely than an EMP event. It's maybe higher probability, but also some severe consequence. I think it does need a little bit more study. EMP has been studied for quite some time. It's been a commission that's formed and reformed and so on. But I believe I would suggest that we take maybe a forward-looking spin as we think about EMP. I think a lot of times we're looking at how do we harden the grid of today against EMP. The grid we have in 10 years will not look a lot like today. It will change. There are a lot of things going on right now and where it's become more distributed, the generation mix and so on. So we need to do some analysis and project how would we harden the grid of the future.
Thank you.
Recognize Ms. Horn for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses and Mr. Ranking Member for holding this important hearing today. As I'm sure with many of many of us in places across this country, but also on this committee, I also sit on the House Armed Services Committee. That especially given Mr. Torres, what you mentioned about the blackout, and we're talking about this, are very concerned about our electrical grid and our infrastructure as a national security issue on a broader level, as well as looking forward as an infrastructure issue. So I'd like to start, Secretary Evans, with you today, if we could. We know we have significant work to do, but I'm glad that you're doing this work. You mentioned in your testimony talking about the national imperative and the Cybersecurity Research Development Act, cybersecurity being one of the major threats. I'm curious to hear how you would assess the current state of our grid cybersecurity efforts and what additional things those of us on the committee can do to help bolster those efforts.
And I want to echo some of the comments that my esteemed colleague just mentioned about looking for the grid of the future. So there is a robust mechanism that we have as a sector-specific agency going forward, but also with the whole of government approach that we take with our partners like Department of Homeland Security, Transportation, depending on what we're looking at. But when we talk about the cyber threat and how it continues to evolve, what we really need to do is really look at where we're going to be in the future and how is that mix going to be, and then based on the risk modeling, which has already been talked about, and then I'd like to bring up again the North American Resiliency Model that takes into consideration, along with what DHS is doing from the National Risk Management Center, the ability for us to be able to take the work that's coming from the national labs, model it, and be able to give you a data-based type of decision, data-informed, based on where we are. How can we project this out into the future? What is the mix going to look like? How is the weather on that? So when we talk about that in the research that we're doing, again, I applaud what the committee is doing, is to be very forward-leaning into what do you think and how research should be 10 to 15 years from now on that grid of the future.
Thank you. And continuing on the resiliency model, I want to turn attention to Ms. Speakes-Backman, especially when we talk about storage and generation. I represent Oklahoma, which is well known, of course, as an oil and gas state, but we also have a robust collection of renewable energy that is growing. In fact, 39% of the energy we produce is through renewables, but we know that the challenge is storage. So looking at the technologies as they're evolving, beyond batteries and where we are for the resiliency factor, I know speaking with our utilities providers, one of the challenges as we diversify our energy sources is ready access beyond just the cyber issues and the other security issues. So can you speak to where we are on developing some of these other technologies to make them accessible beyond batteries?
Thank you for the question. So Oklahoma specifically does not have battery storage necessarily installed, but there's about 259 megawatts of pumped storage in the state. So we congratulate you on that. In terms of other technologies, of course, pumped storage is a very mature technology. It's installed, it dwarfs the amount of capacity that's actually installed in the United States currently when you think about pumped hydro storage as well. Other mechanical storage technologies like flywheels are being used in shorter run, high power applications. There's compressed air and liquid storage, liquid air storage, and other mechanical systems that are in some demonstration levels right now. There are thermal storage technologies, even when you think about buildings being a thermal storage opportunity, but water heaters in your home, there are a number of state programs that encourage water heaters in demand response that help. That is also a level of storage. And those, of course, technically are very advanced, just not used as much in the grid applications as well as they could be. There's also molten salt storage technologies and other grid side technologies that are promising but are yet to commercialize, but the progress has been made on those as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Mr. Biggs for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Lamb and Ranking Member Weber, for holding this important hearing. Thanks to all of you panelists for being here with us today. The U.S. relies on a robust cybersecurity front to keep our critical infrastructure, including delivery systems, safe. And I'm pleased that the President and his administration have made cybersecurity a priority. President Trump's national cybersecurity calls for the development of a superior cybersecurity workforce. This strategy states that, quote, a highly skilled cybersecurity workforce is a strategic national security advantage, close quote. And I agree with this assessment. Nearly 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to moderate a panel at an Arizona State University cybersecurity conference, and we focused on education and workforce in this area. The panel included cybersecurity professionals representing ASU, PayPal, McCafe, Network Command at Fort Huachuca, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And the main issue was raised on how, and some of you have addressed this, and the cybersecurity workforce shortage that this country is facing. The Center for Strategic and International Studies reported that the U.S. was facing a shortfall of almost 314,000 cybersecurity professionals as of January 1st of this year. And I think it's important that we work to encourage a free market, non-intrusive solution to develop a cyber workforce capable of managing not just the threats of today, but anticipate the threats of tomorrow, particularly in the energy industry. So I'm going to start with a question that I want to give each of you a shot at answering, and then I do have a couple more questions, so if you can help me out by being as concise yet as informative as possible. How do you think government can become a better partner with higher education institutions and industry to form an education pipeline that will actually meet our cybersecurity workforce needs to keep our electric grid safe? So I guess we'll start with Ms. Hamilton on this side, and then go my right to left, your left to
Great.
right.
Okay, I'll be really quick because I'm not a cyber expert, but just on education, I think you need to start much younger than that. We need to have it in all of our elementary schools too, to try to get kids interested in doing this too. So I think having public-private partnerships are important, making sure that you bring in, so maybe you'll bring in some teachers who are science teachers, bringing in, whether it's from a university or middle school to try
And
to
not
get
to interrupt,
people
but are you talking about specifically STEM or computer?
STEM, and
coding,
also
et
just,
cetera?
if you're interested in specifics,
Okay.
cyber, get kids interested in that too,
Okay.
early.
Great, thank you.
I'm also not a cybersecurity expert, but I'm really thrilled that my 15-year-old twin girls are here in the audience hearing this, because their high school has a program that is partnered with U.S. Naval Academy, specifically on cybersecurity, and I really want them to take it, so.
Okay, so are these your daughters, you say?
Yes, yes.
Please raise your hands so we can put pressure on you publicly.
No pressure, no pressure.
Thank you. We're helping out. Mr. Torres.
So I would concur with my colleagues here. It's important to really spark that interest in STEM fields early. The other thing is I think we need to provide mentoring, because it's not just getting the workforce out there, it's getting the future teachers and getting the future professors. And this is back to a point I made earlier, which is the fact that we need to continue to get people to advance their education and be the mentors and mentor the future teachers as well as the future applications.
Thank you, and I'm sorry, I'm going to skip you, and maybe we can have a one-on-one dialogue later. So, because I have to ask this other question, which intrigues me, because Mr. Torres has repeatedly talked about and several of you talked about the future grid, or what the grid looks like in the future, and it's really tough to be clairvoyant, obviously, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the role that microgrids might play in making the grid more resilient, and what does the microgrid of the future, what might that look like? And Mr. Torres, since you've talked about future grids, we'll start with you.
So just to make sure everybody's on the same page, a microgrid, basically a simple way to define it, there are formal definitions, is essentially a grid that has its own generation, its own wires to move the electrons, and its own loads to use those electrons, and can connect and disconnect from the larger utility grid. So I believe they do have their role. They don't need to be used everywhere. I foresee that the future grid would be some sort of a hybrid of a centralized grid base with some decentralized microgrids, especially for critical loads. We've seen that they've been very applicable where you have military installations, highly critical loads like hospitals, some key industrial areas and so on, that may have a lower reliability connection to the utility grid, and where you may have some very sensitive types of load, sensitive to perturbations and disturbances in the grid. So you really need to right fit it and right size it. It's not a ubiquitous solution.
Okay. Unfortunately, my time's expired. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McNerney.
Well, I thank the chairman for holding the hearing, and I think the panelists really a very interesting area and very important. But I want to start with a shout out to the Grid Innovation Caucus that I co-chair with my colleague Bob Latta from Ohio. The purpose is to discuss policy and technology, but also to help educate members of Congress and to get people excited about this issue here in Congress, because it's important. We need to move forward on these things. Assistant Secretary Evans, we've heard a lot about how artificial intelligence, how important its benefits are, including in the context of grid modernization and security. What role do you think AI can play in improving the resilience of our nation's electric system?
I think it has a critical role. Mr. Torres already highlighted some of the specific things of what we're talking about going forward and really looking at software-defined networks, autonomous solutions, really analyzing the data, taking the things that we know are going to happen and try to remove some of what is happening at a human level now that could be done by artificial intelligence, by machine learning. And that is the area that we are really exploring so that we can then look at higher analysis of security, and then also the resilience of being able to model the resilience in real time.
Well, is there a significant risk that adversaries could use AI to attack our system?
My opinion of how to go forward for every great new innovation that we do, and I believe Mr. Torres also highlighted this, is that we also then have to evaluate what are the potential risks associated with that, and then engineer preventative solutions that we know of could happen as we deploy those out. So that's the longer answer to, yes, we could do that, but we don't want to stifle innovation. We want to take advantage of those things and be able to use them, but also then make sure we have the right mitigations in place.
Well, I mean, those sorts of attacks are going to happen whether we deploy AI or not, so.
Yes.
Mr. Torres, you want to comment on that?
I would concur with Assistant Secretary Evans. I guess I would add to it the fact that, you know, just about any tool, any weapon can be used for good or for bad. And so this is why it's an imperative for us to maintain that leadership in the advancements of these technologies. So we are the ones that are using these for the right purpose and can actually deter any negative use or any attacks on these systems.
Well, Mr. Torres, I'm concerned about the attack on March 5th on the utility SCADA system. There wasn't much damage done, but what would be the potential damage if attackers had access to the system, real access?
Yeah, and the attack that you refer to was, I believe, a denial of service attack on the SCADA system of a utility out west. And my understanding is that it basically blinded, or the operators may have lost control or visibility from some of the devices. So the attack was on the SCADA system, which Supervisor Control and Data Acquisition System is used to monitor and control elements of the power grid. So if somebody were to gain access, they could potentially disrupt operation of the grid and maybe even cause the operator to make a mistake in operation.
Well, with all behind-the-meter devices and distributed resources, we're facing increasing risk here, right?
There's a potential to increase the attack surface as we add more devices near the end user. So this is where we do, I believe, through the SEDS program at DOE under Assistant Secretary Evans, we do have a roadmap to essentially secure the connectivity down to the meter, essentially, so that we try to minimize the risk back upstream to the utility.
Thank you. Ms. Speakes-Backman, what site-specific geographic considerations are important to consider when deciding what type of energy storage system is the most appropriate for a particular location?
Well, certainly. Thank you for the question. Certainly, there are geographic considerations when it comes to pumped storage, hydro storage, especially underground. You need large expanses of underground. But when you're talking about battery storage specifically, that can be scaled to behind people's meters in the home. It can be at grid scale. It can be in commercial industrial applications. The biggest considerations that are not necessarily having to do with the technology itself in terms of in terms of its capabilities, but the application that you're going to be using it for. So when you need to be in rural communities, when co-ops are needing to use energy storage to offset the cost of transmission upgrades and distribution upgrades, then you'll want to use a specific type of battery or other technology that can be longer duration. When you're talking about being up in the Northeast, you need a longer duration storage type application for weeks, hours, weeks, even months when it comes to wintertime issues as well.
And the cost goes up pretty dramatically after a couple of hours of
Yes, it can.
usage of a storage system. I'll yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Kasten for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Lamb. Thank you so much to our witnesses for being here. As we consider how to get to a low or hopefully zero carbon future, we are increasingly constrained by how to have a flexible enough grid that can accommodate these intermittent sources of power that fluctuate out of phase with where the load is. And it is a really important, really critical issue, and I am delighted to see this committee thinking seriously about those issues. We have a lot of ways we have to solve that. We can solve that through market mechanisms and transmission, but I believe that chief among those has to be grid-scale energy storage. And that's why I was proud to introduce H.R. 2909, the Promoting Grid Storage Act of 2019. And I want to thank Ms. Speakes-Backman and the folks at ESA for their support of H.R. 2909. One of the most important aspects of that bill is the creation of a competitive grant program for energy storage at the DOE, funded at $150 million over 5 years. The competitive program is unique in that it would empower local entities to identify specific demonstration projects and compete for funds at DOE, instead of waiting for the DOE to identify specific projects to fund. Ms. Speakes-Backman, are you aware of any competitive grant programs for energy storage specifically at DOE, or for that matter, anywhere else across the federal government that currently operate like the program put forth in Section 6 of the PGSA?
Not specifically of that type, and that's why we've been so strong in our support of the Promoting Grid Storage Act, because not only does it allow the market to participate in the selection of these types of projects, but it also puts skin in the game. So the market participants are also participating and putting their own business risk at this. So we think it's going to accelerate the demonstration project success.
Well, you've thankfully answered my second question as well of why that structure was helpful, so I appreciate that. In your opinion, does the Grid Modernization Research and Development Act of 2019 in its current form do enough to empower local stakeholders to bring demonstration projects forward that best overcome these informational barriers and lower the risks?
It goes pretty far, and we're really excited about this potential, but there are a number of things, as outlined in my testimony, that can be done to further this. One of them, I think, is very important, as you had the conversation about resilience, and it is to support the for DOE to support the investigation into how states can prove out cost effectiveness for resilience. This is an issue that I personally had after the derecho in 2011, where utilities can invest in reliability, and there are metrics for that, but they cannot invest in resilience because there aren't the correct metrics of that to prove cost effectiveness. I think that's an important part of it. The other part is really Sections 4 and Section 6 of the Promoting Grid Storage Act, I think, could be included in this particular draft legislation to be so helpful.
Well, thank you. And I'm really excited by the committee's work on the Grid Modernization Act of 2019, but I am concerned that in its current form, it doesn't do enough to facilitate demonstration of energy storage technologies. and don't get me wrong, R&D and technical assistance are really important, but without efforts to further de-risk those technologies, I'm concerned that the rate at which they're adopted by utilities, by co-ops, municipalities will be too slow for the scale needed to combat the climate crisis. I live in Illinois, and you can see in the data, we started to see an increase in CO2 emissions because we are deploying so much intermittent energy. And now we're installing, because it's so hard to site transmission, we're installing really inefficient but quick ramping gas generation. And we can solve that with storage, but we've got to get it out there.
Yeah, I just to add a comment, I completely agree with you in the fact that energy storage is really going to, the major delay in having this deployed on a major scale is really about how it fits within the regulatory construct and how it fits within the energy grid integration itself. It's really more of a commercial question that's happening more than a technology question. I think the technology is ready to go.
Well, thank you very much. I'm about out of my time, but I really appreciate your testimony, and I hope I can persuade the chairman to work with me to help strengthen the bill as it pertains to the demonstration of energy storage technologies. And I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Foster.
Thank you. Let's see. Actually, my colleague just mentioned the difficulty of siting, power lines, and there are two components of that. There's a big NIMBY difficulty that's much worse as you approach cities, but bad probably everywhere. The obvious solution to that's to bury power lines, and that is hellishly expensive presently. How extensively have people looked into just robotic assembly, of underground power lines? Is there really any hope to make a big dent in the cost? Are there technological approaches that might really lower the cost of buried power lines, or has that pretty well been mined out already? Anyone familiar with any big initiatives that have ever been tried along those lines?
I think you're still going to have the issue of NIMBYism. You'll still have the issue of having to get either eminent domain or permission and permitting from folks as you put them in. So you'd want to look for other kind of rights of ways, whatever the technology.
Yeah, but for buried power lines, it's orders of magnitude easier if you don't have to look at them. Those that believe cancer is caused by electric power lines, if you can't see the line, that seems to bother them less, and so on. So it's a, so that, it strikes me that might actually, if there is money to be squeezed out of the cost of buried power lines, that might be a good federal R&D and demonstration initiative. The other one is something that would be a legal mechanism. There's a well-documented drop in the real estate prices near high-voltage power lines. For probably partly rational and partly irrational reasons. It's a documented fact. So the question is whether there's some sort of assessment on those nearby. For example, if there's an existing right-of-way and now it comes time to actually build the power line, there's typically a big outcry, even though it's an established, documented right-of-way, that people said, I didn't realize this when I bought my house, and now they're going to look at, the rational part of that is their real estate values are going to drop if the power line's actually put in. And then, of course, there's a irrational thing they don't, or maybe it's rational or not, that they don't like looking at the power line. So if there was a legal framework that allowed those who are affected in terms of real estate value and impact to contribute to burying the power line, then there may be, I'm not sure exactly what that would look like. Whether you give someone, we're going to build this power line, it's going to be expensive, but it's part of the real estate appreciation that you will see. If you take an existing power line, say, and bury it, that will cause everyone's real estate value to rise, and capturing a part of that rise to pay for burying it. That there may be a social contract that's a win all the way around, particularly as the power lines approach cities. Anyway, it's just, but you're unaware of things like this, because hardening the grid by putting things like a DC overlay are very good ideas in principle, and you have to get past the difficulty in siting power. And so there may be some opportunities for probably federal law to enable that sort of deal to be struck with the surrounding communities. anyway, so that's, I'd just like to just make a couple of comments on the BEST Act, another piece of legislation that I've introduced as well, having to do with just encouraging energy storage R&D and demonstration projects. And I guess that's probably been pretty well discussed, I presume, and my apologies for having to jump back and forth between this and the Facebook Libra hearings. But it's, but is there anything that has not yet been said along those lines that might be worth mentioning?
Well, I'd just like to add that ESA and a number of other associations have strongly endorsed the BEST Act as an excellent opportunity.
Yeah, and we have partners in the Senate. I think there's a good chance that it's actually the, one of those rare combinations of things that is going to have a chance at getting through the legislative graveyard that we're trying to populate as best we can in the House these days, but that may be an exception to that.
We have hopes for a number of energy storage pieces of legislation, including the BEST Act and including the storage, standalone storage ITC, and a number of other pieces that we think
Now,
we'll get through.
Let's see, the last thing in my last 3 seconds, when you look at advanced nuclear technologies, some of them have the ability to essentially add storage to it. For example, molten salt reactors have the ability to put a molten salt tank nearby, if that's used as the coolant, so that you could effectively have the ability to, if you have excess generation capacity, that this traditional knock against nuclear is that it's only worth running at a flat level. You could actually spike it up if you had a big storage tank and excess generation capacity. And is that being factored into the modeling and the cost incentives when people look at advanced nuclear, that some techniques have this and others don't? There's been a lot of discussion in the Department of Energy about trying to incentivize techniques that had storage capacity of some kind.
Well, I can't speak to what's being counted in and not for the nuclear side, but I can say for energy storage and the various technologies that this is one of the things that we're asking from DOE, and DOE has been actually doing some work on, is the valuation of the various applications for energy storage, that it flattens out and indeed increases the efficiency of the grid overall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, I guess I am well over time now, so I'll yield back my negative balance of time.
Thank you. Before we bring the hearing to a close, I want to thank our witnesses again for appearing before us today and sharing such great information. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from the members and for any additional questions that the committee may have for the witnesses. The witnesses are now excused and the hearing is adjourned. Thank you.